Mine doesn't have that really.
All stand. Coronial Court is now in session. Please be seated.
Your Honour, I just have a brief matter to raise, if I might borrow 5 minutes of your time, and it stems from the proceedings this week, and in particular the attendance of Constable Rolfe and the evidence he gave and the claim for privilege.
Yes.
As Your Honour is well aware, 4 days after the incident, Constable Rolfe was charged with murder, and in the 2.5 years almost before his trial, he exercised the right that every person has. He waived that right in the course of his trial by giving evidence over a period of 3 days and subjected to cross-examination by very senior counsel. Some might say that the investigation in which he was charged in the 4 days was lacklustre or not fulsome. And here we are 3 years down the track, and Your Honour is conducting an investigation, and we know through Dr. Freckleton that the Commissioner has formed the view that the appropriate outcome seems to be for the 9th of November, having putting to aside for a moment the arguments about the penalty privilege, that remedial advice is appropriate in those circumstances. Your Honour, on Tuesday, during this court's visit to Yuendamu, we heard about, and it was reported about, the concept of spearing Constable Rolfe, and indeed comments attributed that there won't be any rest or healing until his blood is spilt. Now, Your Honour, one could be forgiven for the impression that that leaves not only Constable Rolfe, but all police officers, the way in which to appropriately respond is to resort to a level of violence. Then, Your Honour, on the very next day, 16th of November, Constable Rolfe fronts your court in person in answer to his summons. He gives evidence, and all he does in the course of that evidence is then assert a right. Nothing more, nothing less. He does no more than what any witness who comes before this court might do in the circumstances, and that is assert a right. And these courts, your court, Your Honour, fiercely guard the assertion and protection of rights. And so, Your Honour, I'm troubled when yesterday comments that are made, and comments that are made by a witness, at least attributed to her, that what Constable Rolfe did on Wednesday was disgraceful or a cop-out and a coward, and that he should be sacked, are not a true reflection of what occurred in your court on Wednesday. They are inflammatory, they are divisive, and it's ignorant as to the circumstances of what actually occurred on Wednesday. It has been said time and time again by your counsel assisting that witnesses should feel comfortable coming before your court, that they will be treated with courtesy, respect, so that they, and fairness, can give their evidence truthfully in comfort, knowing that. And so, Your Honour, those comments are extraordinarily unhelpful to Your Honour's investigation. Your Honour has not made findings. As Your Honour knows, you cannot prejudge an issue. Unless it be unclear, Your Honour, all that Constable Rolfe did on Wednesday was assert a right that he is entitled to do, as anybody is, nothing more, nothing less. And Your Honour, I brought to your attention the gross misreporting of the Canberra Times about a matter a couple of weeks ago, and at that time I said it was a timely reminder, given the significance and sensitivity of the issues being debated, that everyone approach this matter with the same sensitivity and caution that it deserves, so that Your Honour can properly conduct your investigation as you have done, And I simply wish to raise that for the record so that it is clear Constable Rolfe has simply asserted a right. Thank you, Your Honour.
Yes, Mr. Officer.
I don't feel the need to respond, Your Honour. I'm not aware of the comments that are being referred to. I'm not slavishly following the media, so I actually not aware of what my friend's talking to. It hasn't been raised with me beforehand. I am aware that during the period of time that Constable Rolfe was in court, he was treated with great respect, including by the people that were in court, all of the people who were in court, Yappa and Cardia. And when I asked Constable Rolfe whether he was comfortable and when he was leaving court, he said that he was fine. So I'm not aware of any difficulties at all. And I tend to call the first witness unless anybody wants to say anything in response.
No, there's been much media reporting over many years, reporting many different views and perspectives, but this inquest will proceed on the evidence that is received during the course of the inquest and on the information that is provided during the course of the proceedings only.
Thank you, Your Honour. And one thing I will point out, because I have at times pointed out other media who have been inappropriate or inaccurate and inflammatory and abusive on times to witnesses. It is not appropriate, but one thing I'm sure of is that Your Honour will not be influenced by any media reporting. This court will take into account the evidence that is heard on oath and will take into account the evidence that we know and deal with it in a fair and objective manner as is expected. Your Honour, I call Acting Superintendent Andrew Barham.
Acting Superintendent, before you give evidence in these proceedings, do you promise to tell the truth?
I do, Your Honour.
Thank you.
Sir, could you please tell the court your full name
Andrew James Barham,
and what is your current rank
Acting Superintendent,
of what part of the police force in the Northern Territory?
the Drug and Organised Crime Division.
What's your substantive position within the force?
Detective Senior Sergeant of the Technology and Economic Crime Section.
Acting Superintendent, you were, in short measure, the Crown's expert called in the trial that was faced by Constable Zachary Rolfe for the murder of, as was articulated in the indictment, of Kumanjayi Walker. Is that right?
Yes.
You gave evidence at the committal
Yes.
with respect to that matter and also at the trial in February of this year.
Yes.
Please be reassured that Her Honour has the transcript of both the committal and the trial. In preparation for that proceeding, you you wrote and signed 5 expert statements, is that right?
Yes.
Your Honour, they are in the brief from 10.3 over to 10.8. And I don't intend to go through each of them because we simply wouldn't get through Acting Superintendent Barham's evidence today.
Yes.
Superintendent, when we look at those statements, we see that you have clearly set out your qualifications. Just so that everybody in court understands, why was it that you were chosen to be the Crown's expert at the trial?
For about 7 years preceding that event, I was the officer in charge of the operational safety section, which was the section that delivered all the use of force training and incident management training to police recruits and police.
So just on a practical level, what does that use of force training involve for recruits?
Extensive theory on police use of force, on incident management, and then practical defensive tactics, practical firearms training.
You in fact helped develop some of the modules and manuals, is that right, for the training?
Yes.
I'll take you to those shortly, but just before I do, a little bit about your experience of policing in the Northern Territory. How old were you when you joined the force?
I was 28.
And so you've had over 25 years of experience, or 20 years of experience in policing?
25, it'll be 26 in January.
And for 6 of those years, I think you were based in Alice Springs, is that right?
Yes.
Have you worked in remote communities in the Northern Territory?
I've relieved in several.
I spoke to you about this outside of the court, but they include, in terms of the Central Desert communities, Santa Teresa, Fink area.
Yes, it would be common to attend incidents in those nearer communities from Alice Springs.
And in the top end, you have been to communities like you told me about, for example, Tiwi Islands for a 6-week relieving stint?
Yes, I relieved for 6 weeks on the Tiwis.
Your Honour, I just make the point, because I'm not going to take Superintendent Barham through them, that in his statements there's an extensive outline of his experience. And that includes, Superintendent, the fact that you've given evidence in a significant number of matters in court. Is that right?
Yes.
Are you able to estimate how many?
I've provided statements about reviews of use of force on, I think, 25 occasions.
Separate to this one, is that right?
Yes.
In relation to your statements, I will take you in particular to your first 2 statements on the 13th of March and then your second one on the 26th of March. You don't have them in front of you, is that right?
I may have.
There?
Yes, I do have them here.
Terrific. Can I ask you to turn please to the second one, just for convenience, the 26th of March 2020. I'm just going to ask you initially about some of the principles of training for the use of force for police. Of course, unfortunately, policing does on occasion involve the use of force, and officers have to be taught what is appropriate and how they use their different tools. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
In paragraph 22 of that statement, you note that Northern Territory Police are provided with a number of guidelines and models to support decision-making regarding use of force. These are covered early in police recruitment training and constantly reiterated through the months of training at the Police College and further reiterated as part of mandatory annual requalification training. One thing that the court heard about in the trial of Zachary Rolfe was the 10 operational safety principles, which are noted to be central to everything an officer does operationally. And I'll just put those on the screen now. They're at paragraph 23 of that statement from the 26th of March 2020. I note that they're elsewhere in the brief as well. I'll just do this for convenience because you set them out in your statement. The 26th of March. of March and paragraph 23. So it's 10-5. That's it. And if you wouldn't mind just scrolling down. Thank you very much. So we see them there. I just note the paragraph above notes that the main purpose is to resolve confrontations with a minimal amount of force and the maximum level of safety possible.
Yes.
So the 10 operational safety principles are up there. We can all read them, but first one is safety first, and that includes safety of police, safety of the public, and safety of the offender and suspects.
Yes.
Elsewhere in the documents, I've read the statement to the effect of, to the extent to which force can be minimised is really a mark of the measure of success of an arrest, for example.
Yeah, the success of any operation will primarily be judged by the extent to which the use of force is avoided or minimised.
The second operational safety principle is risk assessment, an assessment of the possible risks associated with the course of action or option being considered. I take it that the extent to which a risk assessment can be done depends on the circumstances, or that the amount of time for a risk assessment depends on the circumstances.
Yes, but it's an ongoing process. You're constantly assessing and reassessing risk.
Relevant to risk assessment is number 4, the planned response. Can you explain that concept?
Well, as it says there, a lot of the incidents we go to, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, and it's always best, where possible, to turn that unplanned incident into a planned response by implementing the iSensor police plan.
Number 5 on that list is cordon and contain, and the caption next to it is, unless it is impractical to do so, a cordon and contain approach is to be adopted. My first question is, what is cordon and contain?
Well, setting up a boundary that defines the incident and separates it from the rest of the world, essentially, and isolates it and contains it.
Is the cordon and contain a physical barrier?
It can be, but it's an area controlled by police, by an inner and outer cordon.
And why is that the favoured approach?
One, it isolates the incident from other members of the public to keep them safe, and a cordon and contain approach generally allows police to take their time and make considered decisions.
Number 3 that I skipped over was take charge. Effective command and control must be exercised. How is an officer taught to take charge?
Well, they're taught that if they're the first person on the scene, they take charge until such time as they're relieved by a higher ranking officer or someone else takes charge.
Does taking charge refer to physical force?
No, it means controlling what resources are there at that time.
Number 6 is avoiding confrontation. That is, confrontation is to be avoided as much as is reasonably possible. Are police taught ways in which to avoid confrontation?
Yes, they are. They're taught to follow that cordon and contain approach, implement iSensor, not go rushing into situations, and not creating that situation of a confrontation.
So number 7 related to that, avoid force as much as is reasonably possible.
Yes.
Use minimum force.
Yes.
Only minimum force reasonably necessary and justifiable is to be used.
Correct.
Number 9 is avoid forced entry searches, and the note next to it is that they are to be a last resort. Why is that the case?
Because they're probably the most dangerous situation that police can put themselves into by going into or forcing entry into a building where there's a known offender, potentially armed. Buildings by their nature contain all kinds of weapons. Knives in kitchens is a perfect example of that.
And the last one is resources, and the note next to it is accepted that the safety first principle may require more resources, more complex planning and more time. Are police taught that in fact it's important to reassess and determine throughout the course of a job whether you should stop or pause and request further resourcing?
Yes, that's exactly what we're taught.
You referred there to a plan called using the acronym iSensor,
Yeah.
is that right? ICENCIRE.
Yes.
That involves a cordon and contain approach wherever possible. And Beck will scan a little further down in that same document and see iSensor set out there. Isolate, contain, evacuate, negotiate, conclude, investigate, rehabilitate, evaluate. Is it intended that with iSensor you go through each of those steps in sequential order?
To wherever possible, yeah. The considerations at various stages of an incident. Obviously, isolate and contain happen at the beginning.
And evacuate is evacuating those who may be in danger within the premises?
Evacuation is a consideration for evacuating people not involved in the incident from within those cordons.
Negotiate to bring about a successful resolution if applicable?
Yes.
Conclude the incident in the most appropriate manner?
Yep.
And then the materials make it clear that that could be, for example, making an arrest, taking someone to hospital, making the area safe.
Yes, that's right.
Investigate by appropriate action the cause and consequences of the incident.
Yes.
Rehabilitate the scene, residents, victim, and officers involved. What does it mean to rehabilitate the scene, including the resident, the victim and the offender?
Oh, to formally stand down the cordons and try and get things back to normal as quickly as possible, take down roadblocks, move cars or other vehicles that have been used to make those roadblocks and cordons.
Does the training suggest that that would include explaining to residents if they are upset by a situation what has gone on?
To an extent, it could.
The last one is evaluate procedures used to identify deficiencies and successes. Obviously that might not be done at the scene. When is it envisaged that the evaluation takes place?
What's the debriefing process? There can be an informal or hot debrief immediately after the incident with the supervisor and the people involved, or there can be a more formal debrief process days or weeks after the incident.
In your statement at page 9, you indicate, that can come off now, thanks Beck, that although the iSensia model is introduced as a model for dealing with siege or barricade and other serious high-risk incidents, the principles can actually be applied in a much wider variety of jobs and situations. It may be that not all steps are used, example, negotiate, but for many reasons the principles of isolating the scene or individuals will apply. And it goes on to note, in summary, those principles are a sound policing approach for most involvements and are as applicable for high-risk, volatile situations as they may be for many more routine matters. Is that something that police are taught?
Yes. Yes.
We've got an example within the brief of evidence of a notebook and the pro forma outline in the notebook that is some typed directions for NT police or instructions.
Yes, that's in the front cover of the police issued notebook.
Yep. Beck, would you mind putting that on the screen, please? So you see that's in the words roll for written in there. It's just is this an example of the notebook that is issued to police around the Northern Territory?
Yes.
And used by general duties officers?
Yes.
If you could scroll down, please, Beck. We see there the 10 operational safety principles that we've been through.
Yes.
And then scrolling down, we see iSensia there.
Yes.
Is it your expectation as somebody who's been involved in the training of police that those principles would be looked at regularly by Northern Territory Police who are involved in general duties?
Yes, but it'd be an expectation that they should be known to all police, given the amount that we cover them in training and then the amount of practical application actually on the job.
So in terms of the training at the Academy, which you go through in some detail in your statements and the annexures, is that reinforced throughout the career of a police officer?
Yes, annual requals and also, as I said, practical application on a almost daily basis.
One other part of the training I wanted to ask you about appears at pages 9 and 10 of that statement on the 26th of March, the 10-5, and that is the tactical operations model, which has been developed, you say, to assist officers in understanding the appropriate level of force in operational situations.
Yes.
Beck, if I could ask you for page 10, please, of 10-5, the statement there. Am I right to refer to that wheel that we see there as part of the training for the tactical options model?
Yes, that is the tactical options model.
In the middle, you might not be able to see, or those watching might not be able to see the writing, but it clearly indicates above the photograph of the police officer, safety first.
Yes.
And then below the photograph of the police officer, assess and reassess.
Yes.
Why is that in the centre of that wheel?
Because they're the most important, and they're the first considerations or should be the first considerations of the officer. Safety of themselves and other police there, the public and any offenders or suspects, and then assess and reassess refers to that ongoing risk assessment process.
Then beyond that red centre circle is a green one that says communicate. Why is that there in the centre of the wheel?
Because communication is seen as essential in bringing about a minimum use of force resolution.
Then on the outer rim of the circle are the various options that police have to deal with a potential situation. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
You note in that statement in March, physical confrontations are not static but are dynamic by nature. The tactical options wheel turns in either direction, moment by moment, to the appropriate option, depending on all the circumstances. These circumstances may include factors such as size, special skills, age, or sex of the subject and the police officer. We take it from the reference there to the different circumstances that in terms of the planning phase, it would be best to try and determine what the circumstances of the suspect are.
Yes, of course. You always try and gather as much information as you can in the time allowed.
So the size of the suspect is obviously a relevant factor in terms of the use of force options.
Yes.
Very different if you're dealing with a 12-year-old child than if you're dealing with a well-built, fully developed man.
Yes.
And similarly, if you're dealing with somebody who is suspected of committing an offence and they have an intellectual disability or potentially they have FASD and they have poor function control or poor emotional regulation, that's something that you'd want to know about as a police officer going into a situation?
If that information is available to you, of course, it's something you would want to know.
If it's available to you and you don't look at it, it's a lost opportunity in terms of the planning, isn't it, and preparation?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Before we move off that wheel, I just note that the document you've taken information from for your statement says that members should be aware that mere presence is a tactical option. What does that mean?
It means the simple fact of police turning up to an incident can change that incident and often resolve it.
One of the options listed there is tactical disengagement. Can you explain what that means?
Well, that means police moving back, essentially, to a safe zone to reconsider tactics and options.
Included within or underneath the training for tactical options, each of those options is spelt out in more detail and I take it is the subject of significant training during the course of your academic period.
Yes, it is.
And the subject to ongoing training throughout the course of your career.
Yes.
Your statement makes it clear that one of the most beneficial and effective ways an officer can safeguard themselves is the ability to anticipate danger. The anticipation of danger requires the use of all available senses by being prepared for the unexpected. Members must stay alert, be aware of their surroundings, develop effective intuition, and the hindrance to all these skills is complacency. Is that something that's actually taught in the academy?
Yes, I believe that's straight out of the manual.
And in terms of your evaluation of use of force episodes that go wrong or have unintended consequences, have you seen complacency being part of the problem?
Yes.
So So you, at page 13 of your statement, the following is outlined in terms of staying alert and the importance of it. Stay alert, maintain situational awareness. There's 1 to 9. Maintain a safe distance. Always watch the subject's hands. Anticipate danger and problems before they happen. Have a plan. Identify behavioural warning signs. Expect the unexpected or unusual. Be aware of surrounds. Always put yourself in a position of advantage. Do not become complacent. Is that part of the teaching? For
Yes,
Northern Territory Police?
that's straight out of the manual too.
In terms of anticipating danger or problems before they happen and identifying behavioural warning signs, is that another example of where if you know something about the person you're going to detain, it's helpful in terms of your planning and preparation?
Yes, very helpful.
Paragraph 27 of that statement notes the Northern Territory Police are taught that the use of a firearm should only be as a last resort. It's a force option that is likely to cause serious harm or death. Are both those concepts, firearms as a last resort and the fact that it's likely to cause serious harm or death, part of the training for Northern Territory Police?
Yes.
Your document goes on to nominate a number of significant safety rules. Safety rules, there are 4 outlined at paragraph 29. That's part of the safety rules for attending a shooting range. One of them, for example, is keeping your finger off the trigger.
Well, they're the firearm safety principles, so they're applicable at any time you're handling a firearm.
That was my question.
Yeah, so start of shift when you're getting your firearm out of your gun locker, for example.
And do police receive, so one of them, safety rule 3 is keep your finger off the trigger and outside the trigger guard until your sights are on the target and you have decided to fire.
Yes.
Are police taught anything about keeping their gun in their holster or how that should be dealt with?
Well, we do firearm retention drills for when someone is trying to grab your firearm. And that's, well, the safest place for the firearm is in the holster. It's built to cover the trigger so it can't be fired inside the holster. So that's what our training revolves around. If someone grabs your holstered firearm, you then grab their hands and try as hard as you can to keep that firearm inside the holster and then disengage their hands.
I'll come back to that topic. Finally, before I move on from this broader outline, what are police taught in the academy, and I mean this taking into account your period of time over 7 years, what were police taught in relation to edged weapons?
Police are taught that an edged weapon is potentially able to cause serious harm or death, and we're taught that the appropriate response is to maintain a minimum safety gap of at least 6 metres and to negotiate, and that potentially you will draw your firearm.
Potentially you will draw your firearm. Does it depend on the circumstances?
Of course it does.
Was that the training in 2016, to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it was.
In terms of coming now to Constable Zachary Rolfe, in your statement of the 26th of March, you outline your review of Constable Rolfe's use of force incidents from the time of his first operational shift on the 21st of December 2016 through to the 9th of November 2019 with the tragic death of Kumanjayi. There were 46 use of force case note entries on promise. And as you said out in your statement, you did your best to review the use of force for each of those incidents?
Yes.
Where body-worn video was available, did you review the body-worn video footage?
Yes, I did.
In terms of the previous jobs Rolfe was involved in the use of force, were you limited in terms of your review to jobs where a use of force case note entry was completed and on promise?
Yes, I reviewed the cases that had a use of force form added.
I'm not going to go into details with you about this incident, other council may do, but it has been drawn to our attention that there was a young person by the name of Master Gibson. There's a non-publication order over that name. He was located in a wheelie bin in a school after he had breached bail.
Yep.
and you, I think, have seen the video
Yes.
of that incident.
Yes.
Was that a use of force incident?
Yes, it was.
Why was that?
Well, force was used, a hold-down technique was used, and handcuffs were used.
And in terms of pulling the bin down, was that a use of force as well?
Yes, it was.
So should that have been subject of the use of force?
Definitely.
And because it was not one of the 46 that you reviewed, is that right?
That's right.
And it's not possible for you to say, sitting in the witness box, whether there were other use of force incidents that were just not subject to a report.
That's right, I can't say.
You form the opinion that of the 46 use of force incidents that you reviewed, 5 of them were instances where Constable Rolfe had used excessive force.
Yes.
I'll just broadly nominate those. The 2nd of April 2017 at Bojangles with Sergeant McCormack. That's outlined in paragraph 34 of your statement. The 11th of January 2018 arrest of Malcolm Ryder with Officer Zendelli and others. That's paragraph 36. The 18th of February 2019 at Araluen Park, paragraph 44. The incident at Todd Tavern on the 24th of September 2019, paragraph 45, and the incident on the 12th of October 2019 at the Town Council building with the arrest of Mr. Bailey. Have you at any time had cause to change your view about those matters?
No, I have not.
You still believe that they are examples of excessive use of force?
Yes.
At paragraph 49 of your statement on the 26th of March, you say, having reviewed historical use of force incidents in which Constable Zachary Rolfe has been involved, I do not believe he endeavours to bring about a peaceful resolution to some incidents and instead uses quite heavy-handed tactics. I have identified 5 incidents in which, in my opinion, the force used by Constable Rolfe was excessive and inconsistent with the use of force philosophy and the 10 operational safety principles. In these 5 incidents, Constable Rolfe chose to use a tactical option that was not reasonable, necessary, proportionate and appropriate to the circumstances. Constable Rolfe's choice of tactical option in these cases has resulted in injuries to subjects and the potential for injury to himself, which could easily have been avoided. Have you changed your mind about that at any time?
No, I stand by that.
You note at paragraph 50 that Constable Rolfe consistently fails to use effective communication as a tactic option to diffuse a situation and appears to prefer to go hands-on, which is not in line with the force philosophy. This precludes any opportunity for uncooperative subjects to modify their behaviour and become more cooperative. The result is that in the matters reviewed, force is used where none is needed. It is my view that Constable Rolfe interprets any non-compliance or lack of cooperation as a threat, and he therefore responds with a higher level of force than would reasonably be considered necessary in the circumstances. Do you stand by that opinion?
Yes, I do.
Paragraph 51, finally, you note, in my opinion, Constable Rolfe also demonstrates a tendency to want to, and quote, get his man, no matter what, and pays little or no regard to the consequences of his actions, which has resulted in quite severe and totally unnecessary injuries to suspects in some cases. In disregarding the consequences of his actions, he also disregards his training and the use of force policy. Constable Rolfe's decisions and actions precipitate confrontations where he then uses force. The force would not have been necessary but for Constable Rolfe's decisions and actions in precipitating the confrontation. Do you stand by that opinion?
Yes.
Within the various training materials that you have provided to the court, there's a document, I don't necessarily need it on the screen, but for the benefit of my friends and those following, it is Annexure D. And it's page 2. Just excuse me one moment. Beck, I think you do that. You do have that. It's 10-5, Annexure D, page 2. Yes, thank you very much. So Annexure D, just for those following the evidence, is the National Minimum Guidelines for Incident Management, Conflict Resolution and Use of Force. It's a document from the National Police Research Unit. Does some of the information in this document inform the training for police officers in the Northern Territory?
Yes, it does.
How is that?
Well, it forms the principles on which we base our training.
So from documents like this, the national guidelines, you then develop guidelines for the Northern Territory?
Yeah, so this document was developed as a result of Australia is obviously signatory to a number of international treaties on various things, including police deployment and police use of force. This is like a motherhood document from which all police jurisdictions then develop their force philosophy and their training and even the legislation.
So excessive force is defined in this document, if Beck could just scroll down, as any force when none is needed, more force than is needed, any force or level of force continuing after the necessity for it has ended, knowingly wrongful uses of force, and well-intentioned mistakes that result in undesired use of force. Superintendent, given your drawing on your 25 years of experience, including in the training facility and your evaluation of events, can good, well-intentioned officers make mistakes and use excessive force?
Yes.
And where that happens, would you expect there to be evaluation and correction of their behaviour?
Yes, to an extent. There'd be some kind of review and corrective action taken if necessary.
Within the Northern Territory, are the use of force reports and feedback given to officers supposed to be an important part of reviewing the potential for excessive force?
Yes.
Are they an opportunity where you think a good officer has used excessive force for a sergeant or senior constable or someone of senior rank to pull that officer up and guide them as to why it was excessive?
Most definitely.
And is that an expectation within the Northern Territory Police Force of senior officers?
Yes.
By 2019, Northern Territory Police had notice of use of force incidents, including those that you set out there, Araluen Park in February. They then had the decision of Judge Borchers, which related to the Ryder incident, which came down in May 2019, the Todd Tavern incident in September, and then Mr Bailey in October. Do you see there yourself reviewing those matters a pattern with respect to Constable Rolfe's behaviour?
Yes, there is a bit of a pattern.
And that it's a pattern involving rushing in and using excessive force as outlined in the paragraphs that I read to you?
Yes.
What was your, putting aside any disciplinary proceedings, would you have an expectation that superiors would be speaking to him about that behaviour and trying to identify the causes?
Yes.
And trying to modify that behaviour?
Yes.
In that document, Beck might scroll down a little further, the causal factors connected with the use of inappropriate levels of force are set out, and it's noted that there's an abundance of literature in this regard. There are, I'll just break some of these down, 3 categories listed there: personal factors, situational factors, or organisational factors that might be relevant to an excessive use of force. And I'll just read some of them to you. The personal factors include behavioural makeup, a desire for excitement, domestic disputes, financial troubles, burnout, or substance abuse. So all those factors, or one of them, might be playing on a particular officer and leading to an excessive use of force in a particular incident.
Potentially, yes.
And secondly, situational factors, including dealing with aggressive and abusive people, highly charged incidents, for example, car chases, demonstrations, a perceived lack of respect and cooperation from the community. Those sorts of factors can play into an officer on a particular occasion using excessive force.
Yes.
And then finally, organisational factors, the policy on use of force and how well that is promoted. The overt expression of support for the policy by executives, managers and supervisors, workloads, shift work, career stagnation, things like that.
Yes.
That can come down now. Might I just add to that a suggestion to you that organisational factors might also include the level of and effectiveness of supervision and mentoring that an officer can receive.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Because if you don't get good mentoring, there can be tacit approval of those sorts of excessive force events.
Correct.
And if in fact a senior constable or sergeant is right there with you when it happens and doesn't say anything to you to discourage it, that's tacit approval in itself, isn't it?
It is.
I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back to when you came into the force as a 28-year-old. Were there occasions that you can tell Her Honour about where you received some good mentoring and support? Well, I'll go back a step. When you came into the police force in the Northern Territory, were you enthusiastic about your role in policing?
Yes, I was very keen to be an effective and seem to be a good police officer.
And were you enthusiastic about helping people you believed to be victims in a situation?
Yes.
Were you someone who was hardworking and put their hand up for jobs?
Yes.
And someone who was happy to go into a conflict and help sort it out?
Yes.
Do you feel, looking back, that as a young man at 28, you were in need of mentoring and support and guidance as to how to effectively do that, even after your time in the college?
Most definitely. A lot of us come out of the college super keen, and which can lead to, I guess, overzealousness. And if that's not, if you haven't got that guiding hand on your shoulder to say, hang on, let's try and talk our way through this, you can end up in conflict that could have been avoided.
And were there times when you had that guiding hand on your shoulder?
Yes.
Do you look back on that period of time in your life and think you had good mentoring and leadership from sergeants you worked with?
In general, absolutely, yeah. I had some very good mentors.
Can I come to the incidents which led up to the passing of Kumanjayi? You have reviewed, of course, the situation for Kumanjayi from the time when he took off his electronic bracelet and left Kapu up until his tragic passing on the 9th of November.
Yes.
You've looked at different incidents along the way. The incident I want to start with is the 6th of November. I'm not going to play the footage again. The court's well familiar with it. It's the footage that involves officers Chris Hand and Lanyon Smith, and they confront Kumanjayi, and he takes out a weapon.
Yes.
I think a hatchet is sometimes described, and then he evades their arrest.
Yes.
And leaves the house, if I can describe it like that. Now, you watched that video in preparation for giving expert evidence, is that right?
Yes.
In your view, is that an example of the I censor tactics being used?
To an extent, yes. They'd attempted to contain Mr. Walker to that bedroom. It was the presentation of the weapon which made them have to tactically withdraw.
They've given evidence that was uncharacteristic of Kumanjayi. They were not expecting it at the time. Is what those officers did an example of tactical disengagement in terms of what you saw in the video?
Yes, stepping back, trying to make distance, trying to make some time to reassess.
I appreciate that you're basing your assessment on the body-worn video. Have you since read the accounts given by Chris Hand and Lanyon Smith?
Yes.
And they say, in effect, that it was their view that it was a good thing that day. Nobody was hurt. Kumanjayi wasn't hurt. They weren't hurt. And they can come back on another occasion and attempt an arrest.
Yes.
Are you critical in any way of their actions on the 6th of November?
No.
Can I come now to the 7th of November? In your statement of the 13th of March 2020, you deal with this from paragraph 63, or at paragraph 63, and some of those that preceded it. I'll start at paragraph 59. Tell me when you get there, Superintendent, I don't want to rush you.
I'm there, thank you.
Paragraph 59, you note that on Thursday the 7th of November at around 3 p.m, Sergeant Evan Kelly notes that he commenced work. He was handed paperwork relating to Kumanjayi's suspended sentence and that he was an arrest target, and he passed that information on.
Yes.
And in summary, your statement goes on to note how he and a group of other officers, including Officers Boney, Sergeant Kelly and Constable Rolfe and Kirstenfeld, met to try and attempt to search for Kumanjayi at Walker Camp.
Yes.
There was a briefing, sometimes referred to as a bonnet briefing, near the Bunnings hardware store. A plan was formulated in line with the Icensia plan that involved identifying the house of interest on a satellite map at Walpurgis Camp, delegating sides of the house for each crew to cordon around the house, and once the cordon was in place, they would knock on the door and try to facilitate Kumanjayi's arrest by calling him out of the house. A discussion was had in relation to being undesirable for police to enter inside the house due to safety concerns about Kumanjayi possibly arming himself, and to try to get Kumanjayi out of the house to effect the arrest. That briefing was mostly conducted by Constable Rolfe, as Sergeant Kelly arrived late due to other duties.
Yeah.
Once the plan had been actioned, there was no response to the door knocks. Further discussion was had in which it was decided that police did not have sufficient grounds to enter that house in Walpurgis Camp, and subsequently they disbanded the cordon and returned to other duties. You say that you believe that that planned police operation at Walpurgis Camp was a good application of the Icensia plan, the 10 operational safety principles that we've went through today.
Yes, I do.
And you stand by that opinion?
Yes.
That did not contradict the use of force philosophy.
No.
I'm going to come shortly to the events of the 9th of November, but before I do, there is some evidence before Her Honour to suggest that different police officers had a look at the body-worn video of Chris Hand and Lanyon Smith, and it was shown to them by Constable Rolfe at different times between the 6th and the 9th of November. On occasion, when it was being shown, there was criticism of the behaviour of of the actions of Chris Hand and Lanyon Smith, who were being said, it was being suggested that they froze in fear and that they didn't take enough action and they should have pulled their firearm. As an instructor in the college, what do you think of the fact that police officers stood around the muster room in Alice Springs and talked about, or on occasion talked about, the body-worn video footage in a critical sense?
I find that quite disappointing, particularly that both of them are very experienced officers, and Zach Rolfe at that time was barely off probation, a very junior police officer. For him to be judging the actions of very experienced police officers was patently wrong. For him to be showing that footage, patently wrong. And those sorts of attitude are, second-guessing someone with limited information. That's what breaks the thin blue line.
We've got some evidence that, in fact, Constable Rolfe was also sent a text message from a sergeant saying something like, and I quote, "fuck my whole life," and critical of those two officers for freezing in that moment. That sort of suggestion from a sergeant that those two officers had done the wrong thing and that what's the police force coming to, words to that effect. How do you view that exchange in terms of mentoring and leadership?
I think it's a pretty poor example of mentoring.
And you just used an expression there, that sort of critiquing or commentary amongst officers, of other officers who are dealing with a very challenging situation, is what breaks the thin blue line.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
It's a colloquial expression for police and the thin blue line. it's just a colloquial expression.
So just breaking that down, Superintendent, because you've been a police officer now for well over 20 years, you care about your profession. Are you meaning to say there that by officers critiquing other officers in that overtly critical and dismissive way, it breaks down morale within the police force?
Absolutely, that's exactly what I mean.
We've come now then to the 9th of November. I read to you earlier something about what the success of an operation is judged on. If the success of an operation is judged on the extent to which force is minimised, then this operation, which involved the arrest and death of Kumanjayi, was an abject failure, wasn't it?
Yes.
The death of someone in the course of an arrest, whether it's a citizen or a police officer, is the absolute worst possible outcome, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's the reason why all that training exists in the college and beyond, to try and avoid that sort of tragedy.
Yes, it is.
In drawing on your experience, do you agree that that tragedy is not only profound for the family of Kumanjayi and Kumanjayi himself, but it has a ripple effect for the community and the police force for many years?
Yes, it does.
And we've seen that with Kumanjayi's tragic passing.
Unfortunately, we have.
The IRT were deployed, I withdraw that, just going back a step. I'm going to ask you to try and reflect on some of the reasons for that failure. The IRT were deployed to Yundamu on that day with no appointed supervisor or sergeant apparently in command, within the IRT group at least.
Yep.
Do you have any comment on that? That is the failure to appoint a team leader for the IRT?
Well, it's my understanding they were sent as general duty support. They weren't deployed in their capacity as IRT. And had they been deployed as a pseudo-tactical team, it would have followed that a tactical leader would have been appointed.
And that would have been helpful, is that right?
Yes, you don't deploy a tactical team without a tactical commander.
We've heard that, in fact, the person who was supposed to be in charge of that operation and maintain control of that operation was Sergeant Frost, because of her rank and because she was the officer in charge of Yundamu. Do you see, reflecting on this incident, that there may have been some confusion as to who ultimately retained control?
It appears to me that some officers may have been confused.
But they should not have been, is that right?
I think so, yeah.
You have had a look, of course, at the operational plan or rest plan, sometimes referred to, which was approved of by Superintendent Jody Nobbs.
Yes.
That plan, I don't think it needs to come up. We've seen it a lot. But I'll hand you a copy just to remind you, Superintendent Barrett. Excuse me one moment, Your Honour. I'll identify the MFI shortly, Your Honour, but that's the email from Sergeant Frost, the 9th of November, sent at 4:59 p.m. The plan for day one was 11 p.m. IRT commence duty and conduct high visibility patrols and respond to call-outs. 5 a.m. Officer Donaldson, Yundamu Alafeo commenced duty along with IRT members to effect the arrest of Kumanjayi. That's Exhibit 14 in our inquest, Your Honour. And that plan is to be repeated on day two if Kumanjayi was not located. It's evident, isn't it, from watching the body-worn video footage available from the members of the IRT, that somewhere between that plan being formulated and sent out and the execution of that plan, there was a breakdown.
Clearly.
That plan was not what was executed on the day on the 9th of November.
No.
You're right. Even though I'm really great about whatever, I just asked this because I've got a new computer. I can't get access to these documents. They're coming up, but it won't let me access them. I might need Ms. Waltz's help during the break.
We take a break on or about 11 o'clock at a suitable
Thank you,
point
Ron.
in time.
I'm going to draw on your evidence in your statement from the 13th of March 2020. From paragraph 68, you set out the situation after the IRT arrived. I'll just note this briefly on the record, particularly for anybody following the evidence. At about 6:33 p.m, Constables Rolfe and Kirstenfeld arrived at Yuendumu Police Station and had a conversation with Sergeant Frost. Eberl and Hawkins arrived a short time later at 6:53 p.m, about 20 minutes later. Officer Donaldson was patrolling the area at that time. He was called back to the station for a briefing which occurred at about 7 p.m. The plan that came out of this briefing, as you note, was that the IRT members would conduct high visibility patrols during the evening, obtain intelligence relating to Kumanjayi's location and attempt to arrest him at around 5 a.m. the next morning. You note Sergeant Frost's evidence that she said words to the effect of course, if you come across Kumanjayi, then arrest him. However, no plan was made to cover this scenario, which in my opinion would have to be considered as a probable outcome in a community the size of Yuendumu. Do you, in making that comment, are you suggesting that there should have been a plan for the scenario where members did come across him?
I think that's a consideration that should have been made about whether or not, if they came across him, whether or not to proceed with the arrest or engage. But yeah, I think it could have been expanded on a bit further.
And that would have been consistent with the safety principles and good planning principles that you've taken us through.
Yes.
At approximately 7:06 p.m, the IRT members and Donaldson left the station. At 7:11 p.m, they arrived at house 577, which the intelligence holdings, or that information available to police, showed was Kumanjayi's primary residence. IRT members had been informed that this was the house that Kumanjayi had been in 2 days prior when he armed himself with the hatchet and was confronted by police. And you go on to note that Constable Rolfe had a conversation with a man who was in the yard. That person, with the surname Robertson, advised Constable Rolfe that Kumanjayi wasn't there. He'd left a few minutes prior. Further, that Rakisha had left with him a few minutes earlier, and he advised on a general area on the other side of the oval where he thought that Kumanjayi might be, along with Rakisha, seeing other members. Officer Kirstenfeld was informed through a window of house 577 by a child who was inside that house that Kumanjayi was not there, and that Kumanjayi stayed there at night time and would be staying there that night. The child, and I won't name that person, checked and came back and confirmed that he had left a few minutes ago. Constable Rolfe was further informed by one of the community members that Kumanjayi and Rakisha may be at house 511 or 518, which is where some other family members lived on the other side of the football oval to house 577. Given the information that was being provided by community members there, if the purpose was intel gathering, was that significant?
Yes, that was the intel that they were after.
So if the arrest plan was being followed, what should have happened after that?
That information should have been relayed to Sergeant Frost, and a smart operator would have potentially asked Mr. Roberts, is it Robertson? Sorry, yeah, to potentially opened the front door for them at 5 a.m.
I'll come back to the 5 a.m. plan at the end here. You note at paragraph 71, despite being told by two people who lived at that house that Kumanjayi wasn't there, Constable Rolfe and Kirstenfeld decided to conduct a forced entry search. The 10 operational safety principles advise to avoid forced entry searches, and they should only be conducted as a last resort. Was this a last resort in these circumstances?
No, it wasn't.
Constable Rolfe obtained the consent of Ethan Robertson to search the house. Was that sufficient to justify that search?
Well, you've got the consent of the householder, but whether or not you'd proceed would be a judgment call.
Whether or not you've got the consent of the person to enter the house at that time, was that consistent with the arrest plan that was approved by Superintendent Nobbs?
No, it wasn't.
You note in your statement from paragraph 72 that Constable Rolfe places his right hand onto his firearm as he moves through the house, and I'll show you some photographs of this shortly. At 7:13:35, Constable Rolfe can be seen on Kirstenfield's body-worn video disengaging the initial retention devices on his holster. A click consistent with this action can also be heard. This indicates preparation for a fast draw of the firearm. This is not taught to NT police, as it makes the officer focus solely on their firearm. It limits the ability to deploy other tactical options and disengages 2 of the 3 safety retention mechanisms of the holster, which means that there is only one retentive feature left engaged, making it much easier for an offender to pull the firearm out of the holster. Do you stand by that opinion?
Yes.
In one of your statements from the 11th of June 2020, you provide some assistance for the court by looking at the photographs of Constable Rolfe's hand as he moved through that house. Is that right?
Yes.
Can I ask, please, the court officer to place on the projector 10-7 and Annexure A? Thank you. You see there, it's a bit grainier than what we can see in our photocopies, but Superintendent Barham, what does that photo depict in comparison 1?
Well, as I've labelled, he's got his thumb rotating the hood closure forward.
Just scroll down a little bit there. No, keep going. I think you've got clearer examples, I think.
Thank you. So comparison 1A notes thumb resting on thumb lever, rotating hood closure is forward and disengaged. Rotating hood closure is, it's cut off there, I'm afraid, disengaged and engaged with thumb resting on hood button. Is that right?
Yeah, so the larger photo shows the holster as it should be carried with all safety features engaged.
I see.
The smaller photo shows that hood closure rotated forward.
Okay, so we'll pause to look at that for a moment, and then if you scroll up, what does that photo show, sorry?
Well, it shows the hood forward.
And then if you can scroll right down, Beck, if you don't mind, to comparison 2A, what does that show again?
That shows the rotating hood forward on the holster.
In your statement, you set out the timing of these actions as Constable Rolfe moves through the house.
Yes.
Your Honour, is that a convenient time to pause? I'm going to see if I can assist with the actual physical holster during the break.
Yes, we'll adjourn for the 15-minute.
All set. Break for us and temporary
Maria, that's fine.
I'll head over that way. Just let me
No, it's come up.
Oh, sorry.
Just taking a long time down there.
Oh, so you got that. Great. Thank you.